Our next speaker, Sundus Abdul Hadi, was born to Iraqi parents in the UAE in 1984. And she was raised in Montreal, Canada. As a painter and multimedia artist, Abdulhadi works actually around the concepts of media representation and subverting existing images. Recently, she has been collaborating with her sister Tamara's photography by creating imaginative narratives to her photographs through the Flight series. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sundus Abdul Hadi.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, Nuqat. A big shout out to all of the organizers, and especially to all of the people who are here and, taking everything in, being inspired, asking questions, and I hope you'll enjoy my talk. Okay. All right. So if I were to think about the most culturally shocking work that I've done so far, I would say it would definitely have to be Warchestra. Warchestra fit the bill perfectly. A multimedia project that took images of the war in Iraq and replaced the objects of violence and war with objects of culture, musical instruments in particular. So a militant holding an AK-47 suddenly holding a trumpet. Sound? If we could just reduce the volume a little bit. The soundtrack was also collaborative work between local artists, local musicians in Montreal and local poets who helped create the soundtrack to Warchestra. So you get the point. RPGs replaced by saxophones. Trombones under monuments. And it was very much my way of trying to shed light on the stories that rarely made it into the mainstream media. Because we were really watching what was happening. We were watching war. And like today, we're still watching these stories take place in front of us. And the ones that are the most important rarely make it into the mainstream media. Or maybe they'll get a few minutes and that's about it, moved on to the next story. So one of the things that I was also very passionate about was the plight of refugees and internally displaced that came out of Iraq, and now today, again, with Syria and always Palestine. It was very much my way of paying homage to those people. If we can get some audio. I encourage you to close your eyes. So really through Warchestra, I was trying to reclaim the images and also the sounds that were coming out about the war in Iraq, and reimagine them and retell the stories and reinvent how the war was told. The emphasis on culture being one of the first casualties of war was a big part of what encouraged me to do this project, and an attempt to remember the forgotten cultural producers. If we can get some sound on that one too. But in fear of being redundant to myself, not to you, because I'm sure you're not as oversaturated. Oops, no more. Sound off, thank you. You're not as oversaturated with my work as I am. I decided against digging back into my past and focusing my talk on a history of war and media, although I do believe it is still something that needs to be discussed. But I wanted to take it somewhere else. On a personal level, I spent those years between 2003 and 2010 trying to reassert my identity as an Iraqi. You heard in my bio, I was born in Abu Dhabi to Iraqi parents, and I was raised in Montreal, so in that equation, I never spent any significant time in Iraq. But I used to definitely travel and try to visit as often as I can to, I guess, water those roots. And I remember the last trip that I was there in 2010, I stood below the Freedom Monument and I tried very hard to feel free. It was during that trip that I was privy to a quintuple car bomb attack. 5 bombs that went off at the same time. And I hope none of you can refer to a personal memory of that, but I'm sure you've heard about it on the news. But the devastating destruction, whether you're there or whether you're just in the same city where it happens, is overwhelming. It left me in a literal state of shock that took me many months, and I would even say years, to come to terms with it. My cousins were all like, أنتِ أجنبية ما تعرفين إحنا هاي عادي متعودين, and kind of just laughed it off as though, oh, she's a little Canadian weakling that can't really handle what we deal with on a daily basis, which is a sad reality. And to me, that trip, the war and what I had been working on for so many years literally hit home. And I made a vow to never go back to Baghdad. Not many people know that, but now all this whole room does, so secret's out. And it was really the only place I had considered home. This was one of the last orchestra paintings that I did it after I came back, so you could see that there was a lot I had to kind of sift through. This was before the bomb attack that happened when I was there in December. This one happened in October. Just as bad, if not worse, where they bombed the Ministry of Justice and left hundreds dead. But if we want to talk about my identity, to kind of bring it back to a personal place, and if we want to talk about culture shock, that's a subject I know too well. My identity is in of itself a culture shock. I'm Iraqi, I'm Canadian, in Iraq, I'm Ajnabiya, in Canada, I'm the Iraqi. It's one of those things that you deal with on a daily basis. But identity crisis aside, I'd rather focus on how that position has enabled me to create work that can honor that role, and in particular to view it as a privilege, because what I can do as a Canadian, I can go places that many Iraqis can't. I can get visas to places easily. It's a different experience that I always am aware of. When I moved away from Warchestra after completing the series in 2010 and after the traumatizing trip to Iraq, I was in need of healing. And after years of focusing my creative energy in a place that's really it's a bottomless pit, war and violence, there's no hope in it. You can keep digging, but you'll never find anything in it that's really hopeful. I felt like I needed, in a sense, healing and change. I felt hopeless. At the same time, the whole region around us started to erupt in a similar need for change, for serious change from the inside out. If I wasn't to focus on war, I had to focus on survival. And unfortunately for us, our region has seen its fair share of violence, war, occupation, invasions, political corruptions, you name it. I felt the need to focus on the resilience of the people and the fact that they've survived these abnormal circumstances and to honor those who gave up their lives in the process. So the Flight series was my way of bringing back some semblance of the imagination and hopefulness I thought I had lost forever, that we lost collectively. My sister Tamara, who is not here, but she's here in spirit, is a photographer who has been working extensively in the Middle East for many years. And needless to say, I find her photographs extremely inspiring. This is one of her photos. So when I saw this series she had done of young boys jumping off the Rawsha in Beirut, my imagination took flight. And what started in Iraq for me eventually expanded to include many other places whose people have endured far too much trauma. And one of the first artworks from this new series was made in Palestine during a residency there with Al-Mahatta. It's called Majboorin bil-Amal, which means forced into hope for the non-Arabic speakers. Forced towards hope as well. It was there that I had an epiphany